like a bad season or a temporary fever. And they said it with the full confidence of people who either didn't understand the problem or didn't care about the cost of being wrong.
No, they knew. They knew all that.
The talking points were never economic.
Nope.
They were political. They told us the economy was healthy,
Yep.
that Biden's
They lied.
policies were working, that
They
rate hikes
lied.
would be modest and short-lived, and that the
They
so-called
lied.
transitory inflation was just a side effect of post-COVID adjustment, nothing to worry about. But here in 2025, we are still living inside the consequences of their denial.
They lied.
Prices remain
No
stubborn.
denial. They lied.
Interest rates remain elevated. And now, even some of the very architects of modern finance are beginning to sound the alarm. When Jamie Dimon, not known for political grandstanding, warns that the Federal Reserve may be forced to raise rates to 7% or beyond, he's not playing a political game. He's stating what has become
They lied to
mathematically
us.
inevitable.
What are we
Because
going to do
behind the
about them
slogans,
lying to us?
behind the media headlines, behind the manipulated
Literally,
optimism of the
they
political
lied
elite,
straight to our
lies a simple
faces.
and brutal truth. The American economy has been fundamentally mismanaged, not by accident, but by ideology. The facts are not hidden. Over $6 trillion was pushed into the system in under 2 years, layered atop already unstable debt levels and artificially suppressed interest rates. This was not the product of long-term planning or fiscal responsibility. It was driven by immediate political gain, expanded entitlement programs, student loan forgiveness, corporate climate subsidies, pandemic-era vote buying. All of it sold as compassion. All of it justified under the false pretense of urgency. But in reality, it was nothing more than a short-term injection of borrowed time, paid for by long-term destruction of market discipline. And now the consequences are being distributed, not to the decision makers in Washington, but to the very people they claim to protect. Middle-class families are watching their savings evaporate in real time, not because of bad luck, but because the people in power made deliberate choices. Mortgage rates have crossed 8%. Credit card interest is north of 20%. Home ownership has become a fantasy for millions who once believed it was within reach. And as for renters, they're caught between stagnant wages and climbing costs. All have been told they're better off under Bidenomics. Where was the accountability when inflation crossed 7%? Where was the press when the Fed waited far too long to act? Where were the economists, the ones who appeared daily on cable news, when the country needed honest answers instead of political cover? Why did none of them challenge the delusion that the laws of supply, demand, and debt could simply be bypassed for ideological convenience? The answer is as disturbing as it is simple. The left, along with its allies in media, academia, and the bureaucracy, had no intention of solving inflation. Their priority was not economic health, but political survival. And if that meant distorting monetary policy, discrediting dissenters, or burying every warning under a pile of jargon and partisan distraction, so be it, because the illusion of stability was more valuable than actual stability. And the longer the public believed in the illusion, the longer the machine could keep running. But illusions don't last forever. Sooner or later, markets reassert themselves. Sooner or later, reality forces its way through the cracks in the narrative. And in 2025, those cracks have become passive. The Federal Reserve, once seen as a neutral institution bound by discipline, is now viewed, rightly, as a political tool, pressured from both sides, but most of all from the left, which demanded endless accommodation for its reckless fiscal agenda. And the result? The most fragile credibility in said history, a central bank that hesitated when it should have acted, that yielded when it should have resisted, and that now finds itself cornered between a dollar losing value and a political class losing control. This is not just a technical misstep. This is systemic failure, and it has been years in the making. You cannot create real growth through artificial interest rates. You cannot engineer prosperity through government spending divorced from production. You cannot expand the money supply while shrinking the output of real goods and services, and expect prices to remain stable. Every serious economist has known this for decades. The only ones pretending not to know are the ones whose power depends on that ignorance. And now, they want to act as if the consequences are unforeseeable, as if the possibility of 7% interest rates were an act of nature, not the logical endpoint of years of denial, distortion, and deception. But anyone who understands economics knows better, because interest rates are not just numbers on a chart. They are reflections of trust in the dollar, in the debt, and in the people running the system. And trust, once broken, does not return on command. So ask yourself, who is paying the price for this? Is it the bureaucrats who signed the spending bills? Is it the media executives who silenced dissent? Is it the academic economists who sold their reputations for political favor? Or is it the young couple who can no longer afford their first home? The retiree whose fixed income no longer buys what it gives? The small business owner who can't refinance without being punished? This is not theoretical. It is happening. And every time the media pretends otherwise, every time the White House calls it progress, every time a professional economist issues another excuse, they are complicit in deepening the damage. Because this wasn't a mistake. It was a model built on suppression of truth, manipulation of markets, and consolidation of power under the guise of compassion. And now the model is breaking right on schedule. But lies like this don't happen by accident. They happen because someone needs them. Someone benefits. And if you follow the trail far enough, you'll see exactly why the left built this illusion in the first place. Because they weren't just hiding the truth. They were hiding their fear of Trump, their fear of accountability, and most of all, their fear of losing control. And that's where the real motive begins. You see, lies of this scale, the kind that stretch across agencies, administrations, and media networks, are never accidental. They require motive. They require coordination. They require sustained denial in the face of mounting evidence. And that doesn't happen because someone made a poor forecast. It happens because powerful institutions had something to protect and even more to lose. The left's obsession with monetary distortion is not a policy glitch. It's the central feature of their political model. For over a decade, they have built their influence on the back of artificially low interest rates, ballooning debt, and central bank complicity. They needed a Federal Reserve that could subsidize their illusion. They needed a financial environment where costs didn't matter, scarcity didn't exist, and consequences could be delayed indefinitely. Because without those conditions, their entire business collapses under its own weight. You don't get a $1.7 trillion student loan forgiveness program unless interest rates are suppressed. You don't pass $369 billion in so-called climate investment subsidies unless borrowing feels painless. You don't roll out multiple rounds of universal income pilots, rent control schemes, and trillion-dollar COVID-era handouts unless you can convince the American people that money is free and time is on your side. But time, like credit, eventually runs out. And once it does, the math takes over, and the rhetoric evaporates. That is why the left had to lie about inflation. That is why they had to lie about rates. Because if the American people had understood the long-term consequences of these policies when they were introduced, the public backlash would have made them politically radioactive. So instead, they wrapped their agenda in moral language, equity, fairness, inclusion, and used the Fed to paper over the real cost. That is the scam. And Trump was the first national figure in decades willing to call it what it is. Because Donald Trump, despite every effort to caricature him, understood something most career politicians don't. That interest rates are not just economic instruments. They are political lifelines.
Don't come to businessman.
That holds the left's redistribution agenda together. Without suppressed borrowing costs, the whole thing falls apart. Without inflation masking the real cost of spending, the public sees the bill for what it is. Without endless monetary accommodation, the federal government cannot pretend to be generous without limits. Trump didn't need to be a PhD economist to see it. What he saw and what he named was a system designed to reward failure, punish production, and redistribute wealth with the illusion of moral superiority. And the moment he called that out, the reaction from the establishment wasn't simply disagreement. It was war. Because what Trump exposed wasn't just bad policy. He exposed dependency on a Federal Reserve that no longer served the country but served the cause, dependency on inflation to erode debt, and devalue obligations. The tendency on financial fantasy to make unaffordable promises appear sustainable. The left has become so entangled with this illusion that they no longer even pretend to believe in trade-offs. To them, there are only entitlements and excuses for why they haven't gone far enough. But inflation doesn't lie. Interest rates do not care about best consciousness. And now that the Fed is trapped, forced to either raise rates and practice on side or hold steady and let inflation burn the base of the economy, the central illusion can no longer be maintained. This, more than anything else, is what terrifies the political class. Because Trump didn't just threaten their legislation, he threatened the mechanism that made their agenda possible in the first place. He threatened the idea that government could do everything for everyone forever without limit or restriction. He broke the unspoken rule of Washington, the one that says you can criticize the outcomes, but not the consumer. He went after the consumer himself, and for that they feared him more than they fear any fiscal crisis. Trump wasn't interested in trimming around the edges. He spoke plainly about eliminating entire bureaucracy, auditing the Federal Reserve, and ending the culture of borrowing for political applause. He campaigned until he wheeled constraints back to a system that had none. He looked at the foundation for the economic order and said, this is not sustainable, not moral, not mathematical, not political. And in doing so, he made it clear that this wasn't just a fight between left and right. It was a fight between fantasy and reality.
No.
The establishment, media, academia, tech, Wall Street, and the permanent bureaucracies had built their careers, their wealth, and their ideology on the assumption that economic laws could be rewritten by political will. Trump's presence alone made that assumption untenable, and his policies made it dangerous. This is why they lied. This is why they manufactured the transitory myth. This is why they delayed, deflected, and distracted every time a serious question was raised about the cost of their agenda. Because the only thing more dangerous than a political movement built on free money is a political opponent who doesn't need it. Trump isn't just running against Democrats. He's running against the Fed. He's running against the media. He's running against the entire illusion of free money. The myth that government generosity can be infinite and still remain consequence-free. He is not challenging their programs. He is challenging their premise. And that is why they fear him. Because if that premise falls, if the American people come to see inflation not as an accident, but as a political strategy, then everything changes. The moral authority evaporates. The economic cover is gone. The votes bought with borrowed money come due. And the system that depended on endless postponement finds itself exposed and bankrupt. And now that Trump is back and the Fed is out of excuses, the battle lines are drawn. Because this time he's not just going after their policies, he's going after the system they depend on, from the inside out. If the problem was illusion, then the solution must be exposure. If the economy has been engineered to conceal reality, then the first task of serious reform is to pull back the curtain and confront the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be for those in power. And Donald Trump has made it clear, he's not running to reform the margins of a broken system. He's running to dismantle the illusions it was built on. He's going to look at the Federal Reserve not as some sacred technocratic temple, but as a captured institution that has repeatedly served political convenience over economic integrity. He's going to demand a full audit, not just of its balance sheet, but of its decisions, its biases, its backroom arrangements with the Treasury, and its ideological corruption over the past decade. Because unless we understand how monetary power has been used to manipulate markets and insulate Washington from accountability, we will continue to mistake policy failures for unfortunate outcomes rather than seeing them as deliberate strategies. He's going to look at the culture of free money, the idea that government can spend without limits, that deficits are irrelevant, and that inflation is just an unfortunate side effect rather than a political weapon. He knows that the left has spent the last 10 years using artificially low rates to subsidize programs that could never survive on merit or math, from trillion-dollar student loan pauses to state bailouts under the cover of COVID to climate redistribution schemes dressed up as investment. This entire architecture survives only because borrowing has been cheap and consequences have been delayed. That era is over, and Trump knows it. He's going to look at the spending, every line, every agency, every bureaucracy, and he's going to do what no president in modern history has done. Treat the federal budget as something real, not a symbolic document, not a political statement, but year after year, it is not just consuming wealth, it is cannibalizing its future. And Trump, unlike his predecessors, understands that leadership is not about pretending everyone can get everything for nothing. It's about making choices grounded in reality, not utopia. He's going to look at the foundations of the economy and burn out the rot. He will challenge the regulatory state that strangles small businesses while subsidizing failure at the top. He will rip out the incentives that reward dependence over productivity, short-term optics over long-term growth, and political survival over structural reform. And he will restore what every serious economist has always known to be true, that you cannot have prosperity without discipline, and you cannot have freedom without responsibility. And he will do it knowing full well that the resistance will be relentless, because Trump is not just attacking bad policy, he's attacking a system that feeds on dysfunction, a system that treats rising inflation not as a warning, but as an opportunity to push for more government control, a system where the same people who caused the crisis are allowed to pose as its solution, all while blaming the free market for the consequences of their own central planning. But Trump's response is not simply to reverse course. His aim is to make the lie impossible to repeat. That means structural change. That means reimposing real constraints on spending, on debt, on bureaucratic authority, and on the Federal Reserve itself. That means ending the dangerous idea that the United States can simply inflate its way out of every political problem. He's going to make clear that money has meaning again, that when the government borrows, it borrows from future generations, and that trade-off must no longer be hidden behind jargon and Fed speak. He's going to stop pretending that the answer to poverty is printing more dollars, or that the answer to inequality is subsidizing more dysfunction. He understands that wealth creation cannot be centrally managed, and prosperity cannot be redistributed into existence. That's why he's going to take on entitlements, not because he lacks compassion, but because he understands arithmetic. The programs that Washington claims to protect are the very programs they are bankrupting with their refusal to face the truth. If you care about Social Security, you fix it. If you care about Medicare, you make it sustainable. If you care about the safety net, you restore the incentives that keep people from falling into it permanently. That's not cruelty, that's responsibility. And responsibility in this moment is revolutionary. He's going to bring the cost of government back into the public conversation, not as a side issue, but as the central crisis of our time. Because when interest payments on our debt now exceed defense spending, when we are borrowing money to pay for past mistakes, and when we are printing dollars with no plan to repay, the greatest threat to American freedom is not coming from abroad. It's coming from the accounting desk in Washington. And through it all, he's going to keep saying the one thing no one else will. The emperor has no clothes. The system is not working. The prosperity is not real. The numbers do not add up. And no amount of public relations can change that. Because at its core, Trump's campaign is not just about policy. It is about reality. And reality, no matter how long it's suppressed, eventually reasserts itself. But here's what they never expected. The public is starting to agree with him. The polls are shifting. The anger is real. And for the first time in decades, the ruling class is starting to lose the one thing they've always counted on: narrative control. The American people are waking up. And for the first time in decades, the facts are no longer bending to the narrative. The narrative is collapsing under the weight of lived reality. In 2025, a majority of voters across income levels, across backgrounds, now say federal spending is out of control. Nearly 7 in 10 Americans believe inflation is being driven by Washington, not Wall Street. 55% now support higher interest rates if that's what it takes to restore value to the dollar and discipline to the government. This is not elite opinion. This is middle-class revolt. People are not theorizing anymore. They are living the cost of the lies. Groceries up 40%, mortgages unaffordable, retirement dreams eroded by inflation that was supposed to be transitory. And now they're connecting the dots from stimulus checks to shattered savings, from free money to economic theft. They see what really happened. The political class funded their own power by draining everyone else's future. And yes, even legal immigrants, the ones the left loves to pretend they speak for, are walking away from the fantasy. They didn't come to America to be ruled by the same bloated government failure they fled. They came for freedom, not subsidized dependence. And now they're voting like it. Meanwhile, the left has nothing left but slogans. They still wave the race card like a shield, hoping to frame every economic critique as an attack on identity. But the public isn't buying it because inflation doesn't care about race. It doesn't discriminate. It destroys the poor, erases the working class, and protects only those with enough assets to hedge against reality. This isn't about left or right anymore. This is class warfare, not in theory, but in practice. And for once, the people who've been taxed, scolded, regulated, and gaslit for years finally know who's responsible. And they know who saw it coming. Trump didn't just warn America. He diagnosed the disease, he named the Fed, he named the spending, he named the delusion. And while everyone else mocked it, he told the truth. Now, with inflation rising, with debt exploding, and with the free money lie exposed, that truth has become a political force. The polls are swinging, the base is growing, and the regime that once controlled the conversation is losing its grip. The free money era is over. The pain is real, and the American people, working people, immigrant families, young parents, forgotten voters, are choosing the one man who never lied to them, the one man who told the truth when no one else would.
That was Donald Trump. It is what it is. You just gotta realize for yourself.